I'm a boat builder from the Cotswolds in the UK, and I'm currently building a boat called Temptress, designed by Michel Berrier and kitted by myself to be built utilising the latest in CAD design, CNC cutting and modern epoxy wood construction. It's been a busy couple of weeks in the shop, and I've really pressed forward and made some good progress with the boat, which is really nice. It's a good feeling to see things moving forwards now. I've got frame 1, 2 and 3 installed in the boat and bonded in place. The stem's gone in. I've done frame 10, 11, 12, 13 and the transom as well. And all of that is bonded in place and permanently located. So that's a really nice step to get to. All of that is pre-coated and pre-sanded as well. So really moving things forward with getting things fixed. So in this video, we're going to cover all of that stuff. We'll take a look at how everything goes in. We're going to do some potted screws which bond in the components on the end of the stringers, which is the transom and frame 2, I think. Yes. And the stem's going in as well. So lots to look at. We'll also look at frame 10, which is the funny little one where the middle section of the frame ends up cut out of the assembly further down the line. So there's some extra things to consider there. So lots to get on with. Let's get cracking, and I'll show you what I've been up to. So I started out by installing frame 12. This is the only frame in the rear end of the boat that actually has any positioning information on it for the stringers. So because it's got these little side bulkheads, they're going to give me the correct width of the stringers. So once I got those in place and I got this bonded in, I can make sure that they're nice and correctly positioned, because they're not really supported after frame 9 currently, which you remember I put in the last video. So I'll make sure that I've got that frame down to the correct height and I'm happy with the notch. I then marked up everything that needs to be abraded, and you can see I'm just using the tape here really more than anything else, just to tell myself where the sections need to be abraded and where the glue needs to be applied, because we've got the edges of the bulkheads bonding to the stringers here as well as the notch within the frame. Same bonding process as always. We wet out any bare wood surfaces with unthickened epoxy first, and then apply a thickened epoxy to the joint before assembling the part together. Now here I've got the stringers just pulled ever so slightly in and ever so slightly down, so I can get this frame down into place without sliding all the glue off this joint. I can get it fixed, and then I can actually pull the stringers up and outwards so that I compress that joint and make sure we've got good glue contact there. So this goes down onto the stop blocks that are on the legs. It gets screwed into place, and then you can see I'm just using the clamps here to pull that stringer outwards and get the stringer correctly placed for where it should finally live, and also bond that joint nicely. Following on from that, frame 13 can also go in. And this one just has a notch only, no bulkhead on this one at the moment. Then we can get onto the cleanup process, and as always I'm using these Wonder wipes here to just wipe off any excess epoxy and clean that surface nicely. These work really well and they don't damage the epoxy at all. Okay, once that's done, we can get up to the forward end of the boat and I can install frames 1, 2 and 3 before the stem. Now I'm just putting a screw into the end of the stringers here, mostly just to pull that frame in nice and tight to the end of the stringers, but also to just reinforce this joint a little bit further. So I'm doing this with a potted screw method, and you'll see this a couple of times throughout this video. That involves drilling an oversized hole for around about 3/4 of the length of the screw. So you can see I've used an 8mm hole here, which gives free push of the screw straight in, and then you can just see the small section left there, which I'm actually threading into the wood, using the good old-fashioned brace to do that, which gives me a huge amount of control over these screws and allows me to really push that in and get the thread started. It's It's really nice to be using some traditional hand tools on this build now. So we've got one of those in either side, and this is really just a kind of secondary backup of the joint. So once those are dry fit, we can bond the joint together. So unthickened epoxy on all the end grain here, any exposed wood areas. Then I can fill up a syringe with thickened epoxy. And this allows me to inject epoxy into the hole and fill up the oversized parts around the outside of the screw, which is going to give massive protection against water ingress into this hole, but also an increased hold versus just screwing this into the timber. Now here what I'm doing is just leaving a slight little air gap on the side to allow the air out as the epoxy goes in. When I do the ones in the aft end of the stringers, you'll see a slightly different method for approaching that. The frame can then be placed again on its stop blocks on the legs and bonded into place. And a good squeeze out all the way around the outside of that joint lets me know that we've got really good coverage of the whole surface in there. Daisy's always on hand just to do her inspection of my work to make sure it's up to par. Actually, she's just waiting for her mum to come back in through the door. Okay, so frame 2 gets the forward end of the stringers bonded and located in place. Then frame 3 can go in behind that. So this one's got this kind of half bulkhead that comes up from underneath, and then the frame comes down into that notch and gets paired up to the bulkhead. After that, I can start to install the stem, which is going to tie the first 3 frames together. So I'm just making sure that the stem mould is correctly placed on its waterline and nice and vertical. The inside of all of these notches for frame 1, 2 and 3 gets abraded, and just make sure that there's no epoxy there that needs to come off. Quick dry fit of the stem just to make sure that everything's landing exactly where it should be. And that is looking all good, so we can go ahead and bond that in place. Same process again, unthickened epoxy goes into all the openings, especially here because we've got edge grain plywood and some end grain solid wood as well. So I'll come back and do a little inspection of those just to see what's going on as the unthickened epoxy absorbs into that end grain, reapply it if necessary, And then once that's finished drinking that up, we can go in with thickened epoxy and get the joint put together. Just using colloidal silica to thicken up all the epoxy here. Then the stem can get dropped in for the final time. Same cleanup process again, the little chisel tipped mixing stick from West Systems, great for this, for getting that excess out of the way. Then we go over to the Wonder Wipes, and because everything's pre-coated, that means that we get a really quick, easy and clean cleanup. We also get a little glimpse of what these finished frames are going to look like once we get to do some varnish on the inside a little bit further down the line. So that's the forward end of the boat all bonded up, frame 1, 2 and 3 and the stem placed as well. So that's the forward end of the boat all taken care of now, so I can start to move on to some of the frames in the aft end. Same process for cleanup as always. We get those holes plugged that we've used to build the frames and also to locate them on the machine for pre-beveling. So we go in there with some long tapered utility plugs. And the same can happen from the transom, so that's ready to go in very shortly. So I'll plug all of the holes that I used there to fix that down to the curved building jig. And you can just see the final 4 frames in the background there, which are for the cockpit section of the boat. We'll be taking a look at those in the next video as we bond in the very last frames within the assembly. Okay, so I'm getting ready to install frame 10. Now I've talked about this a few times, how this is slightly different to the other frames in the boat. And that is because this middle section here isn't going to actually live in the boat permanently. It's just going to be there for forming the hull planking. It's basically a mould frame, and only these sections from the stringer outwards are going to remain in the boat. If you remember, that was the culprit of one of my mistakes with the plywood sections on the stringers, because I cut straight through one of them and had to replace it. So, ready to install frame 10, and what I'm going to need to do is to cut that along here so that it only goes into there. But we also want to place the inner part of the frame. So I've got an idea how I'm going to do that, and I want to maintain this continuity of the edge of the frame throughout installation, just to make sure that this middle part is placed correctly. So I'm going to drop this into place and just get it sat in the notch. I need to make sure the frame is then in the center of the boat in this direction. So I'm just going to measure from this gusset. I made this nice and accurate so I could use it as a measurement reference. Okay, so now I've got this centered, I'm happy with where it is. I just need to transpose this line up the frame. That's where we're going to be cutting this, but we also need to cut the thickness of this ply out, so we're going to do 2 cuts through the frame. So we'll mark the inner one first. Just double check that is equal on both sides. 156, 157, 157. That's good. Okay, so I can take this out and now do that cut. Okay, so that's the inner edge of my stringer. I just want to come across and get the other side of that piece of ply, so we're just going to come in 12mm. Pick up that line with a bevel gauge. Okay, and that is the width of my ply, so that is what wants to come out. Okay, so I've got my little bridge section glued in, and the idea with that is that it's going to allow me to cut this section out in the middle and maintain the continuity of the shape of the frame throughout this section, because these are obviously going to be separated. Now, once I've got this into the boat and I'm happy that the frame is at the correct height, I can chop this off, and I'll put some temporary other measures to fix this inside against the stringers, and then eventually this will come out and go in the bin. So now ready to get this bit cut out. Yes, I should have used the Japanese saw, because that one won't cut deep enough.
Gotta say, I'm quite proud of this. Little toolbox that just hooks on the cross members in the boat. The amount of times I've been crawling around in here trying to place tools on stuff. For this, I can just drag it around. Have all my crap in a little box. Simple things. Okay, so we're looking good. Same kind of adjustment on frame 10. I'm just going to have to drop that outer face down a little touch. Okay, so there we go. There is 10 in place. We've got the central portion just held in place currently by these little bridges, but that's allowed me just to maintain that perfect continuity of the frame throughout the notch here, which otherwise would have been a struggle. So I've got that down at the correct height now. It's back on its true position on the legs. So that's ready to be coated. Obviously I'm only going to coat the outer part because there's no sense in doing the inner part. So I'll get that coated, we can get this bonded in place, and then I'll put the temporary fixtures that will hold these in, which will probably just be like a little wooden block there, put in place with maybe the glue gun or something kind of temporary that I can easily remove afterwards without damage. So that's frame 10 placed.
Next up, I can start thinking about getting the transom prepped for coating and then get it bonded into the boat. Now that we're starting to firm up the rear end of the boat, this is going to be the final element in that process. So I can knock the tops off the plugs and sand those flush, clean up any of the excess glue, same kind of process that I've showed you guys before using the chisel as a scraper, a little bit of heat gun work. All of the exposed edges, get this little 5mm radius put on them, and I do that with a little handheld battery router, which is a great little tool. So I installed this little pad, this foot, which lands the keel into the king post that runs vertically up the transom. This just needs a little round over on it, so I'm doing this the good old-fashioned way, picking up something that's roughly the same radius that I want to cut it off with a jigsaw and then round it over. There's really no sense in drawing and cutting parts like this on the CNC when it can be done just as easily by hand the old-fashioned way. Now there are a handful of areas, as always, that we can't reach with a bearing guided router bit, so I've got to just do the little roundovers by them by hand. So I do that with a chisel. I just take a 3-sided segment out of this basically. So I put a 45 bevel on it first, then I'll divide that by 2 and put 2 smaller bevels either side of that. And that gives me most of the way towards a kind of round over really that matches what the bearing bit's doing. Certainly once this gets revisited with a little bit of sandpaper, it pretty much gets me exactly the same thing. So that's how I do the areas that I can't reach with the router. There's a look at the finished transom ready for coating. Starts to look really smart as soon as you get all of those exposed edges softened. Then it comes upstairs and gets its 3 coats of 105 207 epoxy applied all in the same day. So frame 10 and 11 got coated and pre-sanded at the same time as the transom. So those are ready to go in now. Same bonding process as you've seen many times before. Unthickened epoxy, thickened epoxy, clean up, etc, etc. You guys are well versed on the process by now.
Now, here's an interesting one for you. This is why I always apply epoxy to both parts of the joint. So in this instance, I just filled up this notch with epoxy and then I slid the frame into place, realized that I hadn't buttered the second side of the joint. And as I've taken it back out, you can see why. So you can see where that epoxy that I put in the notch has contacted. And you can see how much of that frame joint it actually completely missed. So we pushed all the epoxy straight down and out the bottom, and in actual fact onto the floor. And I've got next to nothing on the top side of that frame. So nice indication there of the reason why I apply, you know, way too much epoxy to the joint. But you know, we clean up the squeeze out and then we lose it in the second one anyway, so that's fine. But that's why I butter up both sides of the joint.
So by applying that to the side of the frame as well as within the notch, it means that as that frame lowers down into the notch, it's taking epoxy down in with it as well. So we prevent that effect from happening. It's very important in a circumstance like this where you've got a notch which has potential to kind of slide all the glue off the joint. So 10 and 11 get dropped down into place, again onto their stop blocks which are pre-positioned on the legs to make sure they go back in at exactly the same height they came out at. We don't need to clamp these in place to pull them down to the stringers because we want them to just naturally sit at their correct height. You can see I'm just doing a check here to make sure that we're at the correct height, and the clamp that you can see on the frame is just stopping the frame from sliding sideways and making sure that I've got it central within the assembly. So we'll do a height check at the chines and at the keel, make sure that we're central before that epoxy sets up, because once it does, it's too late to make any changes. So once those frames have cured, once they're bonded in completely, I can start to do this process for securing the middle section of frame 10, which isn't going to live there forever, it's going to come out. So I'm using actually a technique that I use a lot on the CNC for this. If I've got to temporarily fix something down in place, and I can't use any mechanical fixing methods. I also use this for making mock-up fences on the machine sometimes and temporary fixtures there. So the process is using a piece of masking tape on either face that you want to protect. So you can see I've masked up the stringer there. I've not masked up the frame because it can actually be permanently bonded to that without effect. And then this little corner block just gets glued in place. So where you've got the two mating masking tape faces there, we're not going to do any damage when we pull that out another day. And it actually gives an incredibly strong bond. I use this for holding down pieces that are machined on the CNC, and you can even do that with metal components as well. So it's a really good process to do. Once that middle section is bonded in place, the bridge parts, the temporary bridge parts that maintain that continuity between the frame, can be removed, and then we get back to just the existing framework, which is going to help us to form the bottom planking very nicely. Okay, so everything else is bonded in. The transom is the final component for now. As you can see, here's the pre-coated finish, so we're on to sanding that, getting that pre-prepared nice and flat for finishing further down the line. So use my little detail sander to do all the faces, and then it's over to hand sanding for all the edges and radiuses. As I mentioned before, this is very tedious and time-consuming work, but this is definitely going to pay dividends further on down the line when we turn this boat over and we've got a perfectly pre-prepared, grain-filled finish on every component. So I'm installing the transom. I'm doing this a little bit of the old school way, really. I had designed a process by which legs were attached to the transom, same way that they are to the frames, and these were used to level it. I wasn't really convinced that this was particularly accurate due to the fact that we're locating a square leg onto a curved component. So what I've done here is I've done this a little bit more manually. I've measured the distance that the inner face of the transom is from frame 13, and I've positioned that on the outer edges of the stringers. So I start by locating the transom up to that mark. I can then check that the transom is central using a range of different measurements up to this pad and up to the center line, just to make sure that that's correct. And I can make sure that it's the correct distance from frame 13 on the inner faces. Then I can transpose the curvature from the transom to the stringers, and I can also transpose its position for the bottom frame down here so that we can get the correct angle, because the stringer has got to be notched out for this as well. So I measure how far down the bottom of the frame of the transom needs to travel in order to make the correct notch, and then I mark that on there and we can cut that in place. I'm also going to transpose the forward and aft faces of the transom as well, and you can see we've got a bit of extra on the stringer here, just sticking out to give myself plenty of trim room. Now, just to make sure that sits perfectly vertically, I'm using a digital level here. I was going to use a square initially, but then I thought, actually, I don't 100% know that the angle is perfectly 90 degrees between the stringer face, the bottom face of the stringer, and the face of the transom. So using a digital level just to make sure that that ends up perfect. And that digital level is incredibly accurate as well, to around about 0.1 of a degree. So I'll cut just slightly outside of those lines and then I'll slowly come into them. At this stage, this is an initial fitting, so I want to leave myself a little bit of trim room just to kind of sneak up on those measurements and make sure that I don't go too far with the initial cutout. And I can put a little brace just between the deck sections of the transom and frame 13 just to make sure that I can get that perfectly level. And then I can start to do a handful of check measurements just to make sure, in fact, there's more than a handful, there's lots of measurement checking to be done. I'm making sure here that we've got a dead straight run of the keel from the pad right through to all the frames that run up to it, as this is the planing surface of the boat, so this is straight as an arrow through these sections, which actually is really helpful for doing some checks at this stage. I can also then check that we're vertical all across the width of the transom and make sure that my distances to frame 13 are correct, with a handful of measurements taken from the CAD model and checked all over the shop.
So I'm cutting these adjustments here. I've got the transom sat where I want it and I know how far I've got to take it. So this is what I'm using the tape for. The tape allows me to just take out any error. So if I've cut this notch slightly on an angle and you can see it's actually touching it forward and then it's gappy at the back, the tape just allows me to make sure that ends up parallel to the actual finished transom, so I can butt that tape right up against what I'm seating and then I can just come down a couple of mil, stick that in place, and then that gives me a really accurate guide to cut to. On this side you can see I've already got a gap here which is about the right distance that I need to come down at, so actually that's pretty much going to stay, but I'm still going to put the tape on it. It's just going to allow me to again come up to the underside face of the transom, just make sure that the notch is definitely parallel, then just come down, stick that in place. And that's also a secondary reminder to me that once this is taken out the boat and it's not here anymore, that's just a confirmation that I don't need to cut into that any further. So you can see I've got markers now to get really good fitment. So the tape tells me that I'm a little bit too high at this end, so I'll just come down and true that up to the line. And I don't need to cut anything off here because the tape's right on it. This side is good, so don't need to cut anything off there, and the same there, maybe a little touch off the top, so we'll just give that a slight shave. Similar thing this side, a little bit high on the inside, so we'll take that off and then we'll come in slightly on that edge, and then much the same again there. And these are just my marks for the outside of the transom now, so I'm just going to trim off that excess so I haven't got too much material to have to cut to. So let's get that trimmed.
Now, up until now, I've been checking heights throughout the boat down to the laser level at waterline 1 using a tape measure, but I have to say this new little invention of mine is a much better way of doing it. Using this extra long ruler with my piece of wood stuck on the end allows me to sneak up on the height of waterline 1, but the overrun section of the ruler allows me to see if the laser's too low, which is very difficult to do on a tape measure. But you can just see here that I can just get that laser right on that line, and it makes it really nice and clear when the ruler is zeroed, and I can then reference the height
with whatever I'm measuring throughout the boat. And I've done this several times. It's a really useful check just to know where parts are and that they're at the correct height all round. So with all the checks complete with the transom, I'm happy with the positioning of everything. I'm now ready to install that into place. And I'm just going to put a screw here into the end of the stringer, the same as I did in the forward end on frame 2. So that gets a dry fit, then it can come out and be abraded and ready to be bonded. Now, you'll notice that I'm drilling an extra little hole here, so let me know in the comments below if you think you know what that additional hole is used for. And I'll tell you the answer in just a minute. Okay, so if you guessed that that extra little hole is to relieve the pressure inside of here and stop the hydraulic effect of pushing the screw back out, then you guessed correctly. This just allows a much more thorough fill of the hole to make sure that we get epoxy right the way through there. And you can see the epoxy squeezing up out that top little vent hole as I wind the screw in. And the same on the other side here. So that just means that we get a really thorough fill of that screw hole, the oversized hole, with epoxy. So there's the transom in place, cleaned up, looking good from the inside. We've got frame 13, 12, 11, 10, 9 you saw before. We've got the 4 cockpit frames that are still to go in. They're just bulkheads, dry fit at the moment. Frame 4, which is complete, bonded up and cleaned up. Frame 3, 2 and 1, and the stem as well. Really pleased with how that's all looking, and the boat is coming together and getting stronger by the day. So that's what I'm up to. Lots of parts bonded in. It feels like really great progress, and to actually have things kind of firmed up and no longer flopping around in place is really nice, and the strength really starts to build in the boat from this stage onwards. What's going to come next is I've still got the 4 frames to do, which are in the cockpit. They are a slightly different arrangement to the ones you've seen currently. There's some extra little bits to go in there which will support the sole boards and things like that. And they've got to be put in a certain sequence that allows us to get them all placed. So that's the reason I haven't done those yet. They will be done in the next video. And then after that, I'm going to be starting to build the keel. So the keel can go in next. Chines will go in shortly after that. And yeah, we'll be pressing on, get some new pieces of wood in the boat, which will be really nice. And actually just kind of sighting down this now is just, it's really awesome. I'm really pleased with how everything is. We're maintaining that millimeter or less accuracy anywhere throughout the boat, and you just got to look along the bottom of those frames and you can see that it's looking really fair. So planking is not too far away. I'm going to be really pleased to get onto the planking stage, and as you've seen, I've got timber in for that already. So there we go. Thank you for watching. An extra special thank you as always to the patrons that are pledging a monthly amount to help to support this channel and this project and to help me fund the boat. I greatly appreciate the additional income that I get from you guys, so thank you very much indeed for that. So that is it for this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one where we'll get the keel in and the final frames. Cheers guys.